Once upon a time, the lives of almost everyone in nearly every society around the world revolved around plants. We relied on them for food, medicine, building materials, recreation, beauty, cultural value, and more. Except this isn't just the story of some distant past. This is still how we live today. We've simply forgotten. Most of a healthy diet is still derived from plants. Many of the compounds we find in modern medicine were first discovered in plants. And we still rely on plants to enjoy the outdoors and, depending on the person, maybe use certain substances such as alcohol, which come from plants for fun. We decorate the insides and outsides of our houses with plants. Many of our clothes are still made from plants. And around the world, different cultures will often use plants as a common symbol. Plants are everywhere in our daily lives, and yet we have a problem in our relationship with them. Most of us can't even name more than a few. Sure, we can almost all point out the difference between a tree, a flower, grass, and a bush. Most of us can probably even name a couple of different types of each. But for the most part, we have a strong disconnect between the plants we pass by and use every day, to the point where we often can't tell them apart or even name them. We are suffering as a society from plant blindness. How did this happen, though? At least from a perspective from the global north, the story starts, like many others, around 1760 at the start of the Industrial Revolution in Europe. This period led to the gradual adoption of more efficient production methods, more money being available in cities, and people moving there to work in factories away from their rural lives where most of plants are. Over time, cities got bigger and bigger, and more people began to live there. In the process of expanding the urban environment, we often destroyed our more natural spaces and access to nature. If you go to most cities in North America, where I live, for example, you'll find many of the same plant and animal species across regions, but not much else. Things are mostly getting better, though, as we're realizing the value of nature in our cities and investing in creating refuges for it and helping preserve access. However, many people that live in cities, and especially people that have access to fewer resources, still are very far removed from nature. Minority populations were often deliberately moved to areas in city centers through a variety of means, closer to industrial centers of the time, in order to make more desirable land away from city centers available to the upper socioeconomic classes. The effects of these racist policies can still be felt today, in many ways including causing health issues and reducing economic mobility, but also as an extra barrier towards accessing nature and building a personal relationship with plants, because there simply might not be many nearby. This is a very simplified version of this story, and it certainly does not do justice to the full breadth of intertwined issues involved in how we got to where we are today. But if I went into full detail, this video would probably be a lot longer than you wanted to watch. So if most of us live in cities today, where nature is fairly homogeneous, and a lot of us don't get outside of these environments, why is it so important that we can put a name to the plants around us? What difference does it really make if I know this as a tall evergreen tree versus a Douglas fir? The power of names has a rich history in folklore and religion. In Abrahamic religions, that's Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, there's a taboo to saying the true name of God. In fairy tales, such as Rumpelstiltskin, to know a name gives someone power over another. In ancient Greek folklore, like the Odyssey, we see the importance of protecting one's true name against their enemies when Odysseus hides his name from the Cyclops, Polyphemus. Even in more contemporary literature, such as The Hobbit, we see how names are so important when Bilbo hides his name from the dragon Smaug. This is obviously a very Western perspective, but it remains that the common theme between all of these is that knowing the name of something can give power. When we are thinking about names in relation to plants, we can think of power as to how we can use the plants in a variety of ways. I don't just mean how we extract resources from plants, though that is part of it. I mean all the different ways. We call these ecosystem services. Ecosystem services aren't just relevant to plants, but all of nature. They help us understand the value of nature as it falls within 4 broad categories: supporting, provisioning, regulating, and cultural services. Supporting services are things like insects pollinating plants and crops, or nutrients being recycled from the soil to different organisms and back to the soil. Provisioning services are the ones most people can think of, what we take from the environment, like food, raw materials, water, and energy. Regulating services are things like trees or algae pulling huge amounts of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and turning into oxygen, or mangroves protecting shorelines from degradation and flooding. Cultural services are how we get value from nature by experiencing it through things like religion, outdoor sports, and education. All of these types of services are incredibly important to us because they are big contributors to how we both survive, but also how we thrive. They help us to understand just how valuable nature is to us. In fact, there is a lot of research being done to assign a monetary value to the sum of these services to help governments and corporations understand just how valuable nature is, and especially how valuable it is to protect it. For example, it's estimated that bees pollinating our crops is worth hundreds of billions of dollars every year, and they do it for free. There was also a study that came out this year which showed that the life of every whale can be valued around $2 million, which, if we use the estimated number of whales in the world, equals $2.6 trillion right now. There are problems with thinking about nature in such monetary terms, though. This, at least at the level of how we think about things, leads to further and further commodification of nature. But when we think of nature, values like freedom come to mind, not profit and control. So how does this relate back to why it's important to know the names of plants around us? Well, it connects us to nature and typically gives us a better understanding. When we learn the names of plants, we often are learning more about them too. I might be walking through my local woods and see some salal, which you can see here has little berries. If I know the name of the plant, I can look up if these usually tasty looking berries can be eaten. Furthermore, it helps to connect us to the past. The more we learn about the plants around us, the more we learn about the history of the land and how past societies used these plants and why, or in other words, how they lived. For example, I know these red alder trees are commonly found in areas that have been recently disturbed. Upon a little digging, I can find out that not so long ago, this area was logged out for a housing development that never got built. If you were interested, you might also learn that they're great for smoking salmon, or that by looking for discoloration on their leaves, I can know that an area is probably high in ozone pollution. With all of this knowledge, though, what's the big picture? First off, it gives power back to the individual. Much of our relationships with plants today are dictated by governments and companies, but the more we build our personal relationships with plants, the more power and agency we retrieve for ourselves. Also, the more species we can name and understand, the more we care about them, and the more we want to protect them. In a world that is in the midst of a climate crisis, we need to protect all the plants and nature we can. We know that there's massive damage being done to all types of ecosystems through the forms of things like logging, overfarming, wildfires, and more. All of this comes down to how we interact with our world and, by extension, plants, animals, and all of nature. We have an exploitative relationship with the non-human aspects of our planet, and this needs to stop, or else we are facing a catastrophe. I encourage everyone to go out and learn the name of at least one new plant today, and from there, learn what it can be used for and its relationship with people. Is it edible, poisonous? Is it an important symbol like a national flower or tree? Did we use it as diapers in the past? I'm serious. Lots of cultures used to use mosses as diapers, and I totally understand why. I mean, just look at how soft it looks. Anyways, I bet once you learn the name of a new plant, you'll start to notice it more. Thank you, Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. And soon you'll care more about it too. Maybe you'll even point it out to your family members or tell your friends about it. The point is, go learn about plants. It'll make your life richer and get you out into nature, which is always a good thing. I just want to follow up on this and say that this video was absolutely focused on a perspective from the global north and does not paint the full picture. There are many cultures and societies around the world today that still have intimate relationships with the plants around them. However, many of these are threatened as we see urbanization and environmental degradation increase around the world. I implore you to seek out resources on what you can do as an individual to educate yourself on different perspectives from more diverse knowledge sets on this video's topic. If you want to know some of my thoughts about what individuals can do to help against climate change, let me know and I'd be happy to provide.